The rattle of glass bottles clinking together was faint, but sharp in the quiet of the garage. I thought maybe it was a raccoon or some neighborhood kid snooping through the side door again. It was October, not exactly Christmas light season, but the bin labeled Christmas lights was pulled halfway off the shelf and there was movement behind it. Then I saw the top of my dad's head. His hair, thinner than I remembered it, caught a stripe of sunlight from the open side door. He was hunched over, back to me, mumbling to himself. I didn't call out right away. I just watched. Because I knew that bin didn't have Christmas lights. It had my comics. All of them. Bagged, boarded, boxed in alphabetical order, series separated with white plastic dividers I cut by hand back when I was 12. I used to sit on the basement carpet with a ruler, a pair of scissors, and an obsessive need to keep Batman separate from X-Men. That bin held my entire childhood in slabs of glossy, colorful paper. And there was my dad, elbow deep in it, peeling open sleeves like a guy checking lottery tickets. Jesus Christ, I said, not loud, more like a reflex. He froze, didn't turn right away, just held whatever issue he was looking at like it was suddenly burning his fingers. Then he straightened. He didn't even pretend to smile. "Didn't hear you come in," he said, brushing dust off his flannel like that changed anything. I nodded slowly, took a few steps forward, saw the truth spill out clearer. Some of the comics were already gone. I could see the empty plastic bags. I could see the missing sections in the row. Avengers was gutted. My old run of Sandman, just the first 2 issues left. "You sold them?" I asked, my voice dry. He didn't answer. I bent down, picked up an empty bag with a white label that still had my handwriting on it. Ultimate Spider-Man 1-12. The sticker was crooked because I'd slapped it on when I was 13, excited and clumsy. "You actually sold them," I repeated louder now. Dad scratched his chin, didn't meet my eyes. "Not all of them." That made something in me crack sideways. What the hell does that mean, not all of them? Which ones, Dad? The ones you thought wouldn't be missed? He looked at me like I was making a big deal out of nothing. "Come on," he said, "you're almost 30, you live 2 states away." They were just sitting in here gathering dust. I felt my throat tighten. "Those were mine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I saved up for those. I mowed lawns. I skipped lunch at school sometimes. You remember that?" He shrugged. "You were a kid." "Exactly, that's what made them mine." The silence after that felt stretched thin. Then I saw it, the black garbage bag by the wall, bulging with something too heavy for trash but too awkward for tools. I walked over and opened it. More comics, bagged ones, some loose. A couple still had price tags from when I bought them at Randy's Collectibles in 8th grade. I saw the Daredevil, Born Again arc still in the set of Mylar sleeves I splurged on when I got my first part-time job. And it wasn't just the comics, it was me in that bag. All the afternoons I spent alone in my room reading instead of dealing with the fights happening downstairs. The nights I'd reread issue 241 of The Flash because the art made the pain feel slower. The years of retreating into worlds where people with power still had morals and good guys sometimes won. "Why?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. My dad looked old. Not just older, old, like life had peeled layers off him in the last year. His gut hung softer under the shirt. His eyes didn't hold defiance anymore, just tiredness, and maybe something darker like guilt buried under stubbornness. "I needed the cash," he said finally. There it was. Like someone had flipped a switch in the room and turned every object sour. "You needed cash," I echoed. "For what?" "Beer." I waved toward the empty Coors bottles near the tool bench. His jaw tightened. "Don't talk to me like that." "I came here to fix your back fence," I snapped, "and bring you groceries, and you're here pawning off my childhood for Coors Light." He turned away, walked a few steps like maybe the conversation would fade if he moved far enough. "I didn't think you'd care," he said. "They were just comics." And that line, "just comics," did something irreversible to me. Because growing up he knew they were. He's the one who used to drive me to the store every Saturday. He'd wait in the truck while I spent 30 minutes deciding between 2 titles. He bought me my first long box. Wrote to Sam, "Keep dreaming," in Sharpie on the lid. He used to be proud of how careful I kept them. Now he was selling them for cash behind my back. "How many?" I asked. He didn't answer. So I asked again, "How many did you sell, Dad?" Still silent. I stepped closer, my voice colder. How many? Just give me a number. He looked at me, jaw tight. I don't know, maybe 100. That felt like a punch. 100, I repeated, blinking. He opened his hands in that way people do when they think it's no big deal. I sold them to that guy down at Mulberry Pawn. You can go buy them back if they matter so much. Buy them back, I laughed, but it didn't sound right. It came out like something broken. You stole from me, I said. You sold my property for your beer money, and now you want me to buy it back. My dad's eyes narrowed. You left them here, you abandoned them. That's not stealing, that's cleaning up. I clenched my fists at my sides. I wanted to scream, but instead I grabbed the rest of the bin and started walking toward my car. Where are you going with those? He barked. I didn't stop. You don't live here anymore, Sam. I turned at the car. Neither do they, I said, nodding at the comics. He didn't reply. I drove off before I said something worse. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed at a budget motel near the interstate just because I couldn't bear the idea of crashing on his couch. The whole drive there, the bin rattled in the back seat. Every speed bump felt like my childhood shaking loose. I called the pawn shop the next morning. Guy said he remembered my dad, said he came in a few times, dropping off small batches of comics, usually drunk or smelling like it. No receipts, cash only. He was honest at least. You can come by, the guy said, but I can't promise they're all here. Some of them moved quick, had some early Amazing Spider-Man in there, pretty sweet copies. I hung up. I sat in my car for a long time after that, just staring at the dashboard. There were two kinds of people in my life, the ones who respected boundaries and the ones who acted like boundaries were temporary inconveniences. Guess which one my dad was. But this wasn't just about comics. It was about trust, about memory, about what gets taken when someone stops seeing you as a person and starts seeing you as an ATM of forgiveness. That afternoon I drove to Mulberry Pawn. I parked around the back like I used to when I was a broke college kid pawning old textbooks. The place hadn't changed. Same security bell on the door, same stale smell of dust and regret. I stepped in, the guy behind the counter looked up mid-lunch. You Sam? I nodded. He pointed to a plastic tub under the glass case. That's what's left. I walked over. Half the sleeves were loose now. Some of the bags were cloudy like they'd been manhandled by greasy hands. A few of my old favorites were just gone. Issue 1 of The Killing Joke gone. X-Men God Loves Man Kills gone. The full Batman Year 1 run, only Part 4 remained. I felt hollow. How much for the rest? I asked. The guy ran a calculator, $250. I didn't argue, I just paid, took the tubs, carried it like a coffin back to my car. I sat there for a long time again. Because that's what grief does, it slows time. Later that evening, I texted my dad one line. We're done. He didn't reply. Didn't call, didn't ask why. Maybe he thought I was bluffing, or maybe he just didn't care anymore. But I did. And I was finally old enough to know that some doors don't need to stay open just because someone shares your blood. It's been 3 weeks since I saw my dad in that garage. I haven't responded to his 2 texts. The first just said, "You overreacted." The second came 5 days later. "You always were too sentimental about stuff." I didn't answer either. I just stared at my phone, thumb hovering over the block button for a full minute before tossing it face down on my coffee table. Because if I said something, I'd say everything, and once that comes out, there's no putting it back. Instead, I tried to move on. I laid all the salvaged comics out on my living room floor, separating what I'd recovered from what was lost. The difference hit me like cold water. I'd had a full, complete run of Saga. Now I was missing 4 issues, 2 of them key arcs. But what hit harder? The notes were missing. Back in high school, I used to write tiny pencil notes on the inside of the boards. Not valuable notes, not money-wise, just stuff like, "Read this after Dad got arrested for the DUI, felt like I needed this story." Or "First time I kissed Amy, came home and read this to calm down." They weren't just comics. They were journals in disguise. And someone bought those thoughts off a dusty pawn shelf for $3. That night I barely slept. When I did dream, it was of my dad, not drunk, not angry, just empty. The way he looked when I caught him, like he knew he'd messed up but didn't have the tools to fix it, so he just stood there like a worn-down statue while the world moved on without him. The next day, I did something I hadn't planned. I called Randy. As in Randy's Collectibles, the comic shop I grew up in. I hadn't been there in years, not since I moved states away and started teaching high school English. But the place was still open, and Randy still picked up the phone himself. Sam, little Sam, holy crap man, haven't heard your voice in a decade. It caught me off guard how happy he sounded. I laughed even though I didn't mean to. Yeah, hey Randy. Don't tell me you're looking for work. I already got 2 high schoolers who don't know the difference between Vertigo and Valiant. No, I said, I just needed to ask something. I told him what happened. Not all of it, but enough. He didn't interrupt, just let me talk. When I paused, he let the silence breathe like a good friend does. Finally, I said, do you ever feel like your childhood just leaves you? Like someone comes along and sells it out from under you, and suddenly you're just this older version of yourself with no proof that you ever felt joy the way you used to. Randy's voice softened. Sam, I've seen thousands of collectors. The stories change, but the pain's the same. You weren't just robbed of books. You were robbed of proof. That's why it hurts. I nodded even though he couldn't see it. Then he said something that changed my whole week. Tell you what, come by, bring the ones you have left. Let's see what we can do. So I made the drive. 4 hours through leaf-colored backroads and rusty towns that hadn't changed since the 90s. I played old playlists from college and let the car fill with a kind of grief-tinged nostalgia I hadn't felt in years. When I pulled into the parking lot of Randy's Collectibles, it was like a time capsule cracked open. Same peeling sign, same chalkboard easel out front with the words, "New ARRIVALS plus free stickers for anyone who says Batman SMILES." Inside, it smelled the same, like paper and sweat and old hopes. Randy hadn't changed much. He was balder, heavier, but his eyes still had that mischief I remembered from when I was 14 and too shy to buy Preacher off the top shelf. He gave me a hug like I was family. Then we got to work. I laid the salvaged comics out on the table. He whistled low. You kept these in good shape, he said. Even with a few missing, this is a solid foundation. I told him about the lost ones, the pawn shop, my dad. He didn't say anything judgmental, just nodded, absorbing. Then he pulled out a worn binder from under the counter. I keep a little registry, he said. People bring in all sorts of things. Sometimes I jot down unique markers, handwritten notes, personalized stickers, stuff like that. He flipped to a tab marked Misc High Sentiment. 3rd page in, there it was. Ultimate Spider-Man Run, handwritten pencil note on backboard, skipped lunch to afford this one. I stared at it. That's mine, I said, breath catching. I thought so, Randy said. A guy came in maybe a month ago, tried selling it. I recognized your handwriting, Sam. He said his name was Sam too, but he looked too old, had this wild story about you giving him permission. My stomach dropped. My dad used my name. Did you buy them? No, Randy said, firm. Told him we don't take second-hand goods without receipts or proof of ownership. He didn't push it, just walked out. I sank into the nearest stool. He tried to sell my comics using my name. It wasn't just beer money anymore. It was identity theft in the emotional sense. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. When I was a kid, he once used my savings jar to cover a bounced rent check and told me we're a team. That was the first time I understood that sometimes love meant guilt instead of apology. Before I left, Randy handed me something. A single comic bagged and boarded with the words "Not for Sale" scribbled in red Sharpie across the top. It was Flash 241, the same issue I used to reread during the worst nights. This showed up in a trade-in lot from out of state, he said. Saw your pencil note, figured it might matter. I turned it over, my writing was still there. Read this after Dad's DUI, felt like I needed this story. I swallowed hard, I don't have cash on me. It's not for sale, Randy cut in, it's yours, always was. I left the shop crying for the first time in years. Back home I started therapy. Not because of the comics exactly, but because I realized something. I'd been treating this whole mess like it was about stuff. About paper, about ink, about cardboard boxes with white labels. But it was. It was about betrayal, about how my dad had chipped away at the little structures I'd built to keep myself sane, about how he always seemed to reach in and take my trust, my space, my history, and called it just cleaning up. The therapist was a quiet woman named Jocelyn who didn't make me retell the worst parts twice. She asked smart questions, like, when did you stop trusting him? And why did you leave the comics behind in the first place? That second one hit hard. Because I had left them. After college, I moved into a series of apartments that barely fit me, let alone boxes of collectibles. I told myself they were safer in the garage, but maybe deep down, I didn't want to bring that part of myself into adulthood. Maybe I was trying to outgrow the kid who used fiction as armor. Or maybe I just didn't want to admit I was scared that if I opened those boxes, I'd find out I didn't belong to those stories anymore. But seeing what happened when someone else treated them like trash, that reminded me I still do. One night I opened a blank notebook. At the top of the first page I wrote, "Recovery log, what I still have, what I lost, what I'm going to rebuild." It wasn't about value. It was about memory. It was about reclaiming my own timeline from the man who had tried to rewrite it without me. And as I wrote out each missing issue and what it meant to me, I realized something strange. My dad never asked for forgiveness. He hadn't called, hadn't followed up. It was like he expected me to just come back like I always had. Like all his bridges were self-repairing. But this time, I was letting it burn. The next time I heard from my dad, it was through a mutual acquaintance, my cousin Dylan. We hadn't talked in nearly a year, but he texted me out of the blue one Thursday evening. "Hey man, just saw your dad at the VFW. He's been telling people you cut him off over some comic books. He looked rough." I stared at the message a long time before replying. He's lying, it wasn't about comics, it was about respect. Dylan didn't push back, he just responded with, "Yeah, figured it was something deeper." That was it, just one more person who'd seen the smokescreen my dad tossed up to avoid dealing with the actual fire. It pissed me off in a way I hadn't expected. Not because Dylan believed him, he didn't. But because my dad was out there rebranding the whole story, turning it into a harmless little family spat over silly collector stuff, as if I'd disowned him for selling baseball cards or vintage Hot Wheels. He made it sound petty. Like I was petty. Like I was some man-child who hadn't learned to let go of childhood things. That's when it hit me. He didn't see what he did as betrayal. He saw it as me being ungrateful. Just like when I was 10 and he borrowed my birthday cash to cover a bar tab, then told me I was selfish for asking about it. Or when I was 15 and I hid money in my sock drawer to buy a used bike only to find it gone one afternoon. He told me I must have miscounted. But the next day he had a new zip-up hoodie with the tags still on. Back then I let it slide. Back then I needed a roof and food and peace. But I'm not that kid anymore. And I'm done being quiet about it. I spent that weekend scanning the rest of my collection, the ones I'd saved, the ones I recovered from the pawn shop, and even the replacements I'd started to buy back online. It wasn't about restoring a full catalog. It was about ownership, about laying bricks back down on the foundation he'd cracked. I created a spreadsheet with titles, issue numbers, condition, and emotional value scores. I gave each comic a memory tag like "read this after my first breakup" or "snuck this into church during Mom's Easter service." It was nerdy, it was obsessive, it was mine. That Sunday night I got a voicemail. From him. I don't know why I listened to it. Maybe I was hoping he'd finally say what he needed to say. But no. His voice was slow, slurred. "Hey Sammy, I was going through some of the boxes in the attic and I found a few more of your old things. Thought maybe you'd want to pick them up. You don't have to say anything, just come by." Click. That was it. No apology, no I messed up. Just a half-assed bait for reconciliation that assumed I'd still show up when called, like some old dog that always came back when whistled for. I didn't reply. I didn't even save the message. Instead, I called my therapist the next morning and asked to move up my appointment. Because something was bubbling under the surface, a heat in my chest I couldn't name, and I knew if I didn't talk it out soon, I'd say something I couldn't take back. Jocelyn, my therapist, listened patiently while I vented. About the voicemail, about the rebranding, about how I used to believe silence kept things peaceful when really it just taught people I was an easy target. She asked one question that froze me in my seat. When was the last time he asked about you? I blinked. She waited. I started counting backwards in my mind. Birthday, no, he'd texted HBD 2 days late. When I got the teaching job, no, he hadn't called, Mom did. When I broke up with my ex after 4 years, no again, he said you'll bounce back and then changed the subject to whether I still had that flathead screwdriver he liked. I couldn't remember the last time my dad genuinely asked me how I was doing and listened for the answer. That realization cut deeper than anything he'd taken. Because the comics, as painful as that was, were symptoms, not the disease. The real damage. It was the way he always took and took and took, and when I pulled away, he acted like I was punishing him. He saw boundaries as betrayal, and my silence as cruelty. But in reality, it was the only language he taught me was safe. A week later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a pawn ticket stub, yellowed, creased, still faintly smelling of smoke. On the back, in my dad's chicken scratch handwriting, it said, "These are yours." No note, no explanation. Just a date and a location, Hamilton Pawn, 4th Cent. It wasn't the same place as before. I went. I don't know why, morbid curiosity maybe. The guy behind the counter looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I handed him the stub, he squinted at it. Yeah, this came in about 2 months ago. Some guy pawned a short box of old comics, said they were his son's, haven't sold 'em yet. He pulled out the box from under a rack of old vinyl records. I recognized the label on the side, Sam's Box 3. My handwriting again. Inside were issues I hadn't even realized were missing. Deep cuts from my collection, stuff like Starman 6, Hawkman Annual 1, Green Arrow, The Longbow Hunters, and a dog-eared Black Hole one I'd read so many times the spine had creased. They were still bagged. Still intact. Still mine. I bought them back for $75. Didn't argue. Didn't ask questions. Didn't leave a message for him either. When I got home, I put the box next to the others. Then I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to him. To myself. A kind of declaration. I don't need your permission to protect what matters to me. You don't get to tell me how much pain is the right amount to feel. I may never get an apology, and that sucks, but I can still move forward without dragging your denial behind me. I folded the letter, slid it into a copy of the Flash 241, and taped the backboard shut. A time capsule. A boundary made physical. I haven't spoken to my dad since the voicemail. Some days I feel guilty. Other days, I remember what he used to say when I cried over broken toys or stolen savings. Toughen up, Sam, the world doesn't owe you comfort. Maybe that's true. But I've learned something else too. He doesn't owe me comfort either. And I don't owe him silence. There's a line I used to hear growing up. It's not that big of a deal. I heard it when my bike was borrowed and never returned. When my Game Boy disappeared after a weekend with his drinking buddies. When he promised to pick me up from baseball practice and showed up 2 hours late, reeking of gin and smoke. Every time I got upset. It's not that big of a deal. I think that phrase got embedded in my bloodstream. It became the lens I used to shrink down my own hurt until the damage was so compact, so disguised, even I couldn't point to it clearly. But when he sold my comics, something broke, or maybe something finally snapped back into place. I started keeping a list. Not to guilt myself. Not to prove him wrong. Just to see it. It started as a scribble in the Notes app on my phone, then it became a journal entry, then a spreadsheet, and before I knew it, I was sorting my life into 2 columns. What was taken from me? What I never got back. It wasn't just stuff, it wasn't just comics. It was apologies, time, safety, truth. The first thing on the list. He sold my childhood for $75 and a 6-pack. My therapist told me it was a form of self-witnessing, numbing the pain, refusing to let it vanish under someone else's version of the truth. I didn't show the list to anyone. Not even my mom. Especially not her. Because she was still in his orbit even after the divorce. They'd been split for years, but she always seemed to excuse his gravity, said things like he means well and he just doesn't know how to show it. She didn't know about the comics, not yet. But that changed one Sunday afternoon when she called and said, "I ran into your dad at Food Lion. He said you're not speaking to him anymore. What happened?" I didn't want to have that conversation. Not on a Sunday, not while folding laundry in my quiet apartment. But something in me was tired of silence. So I told her everything. She got quiet, then she said, "Oh, Sam. Not I'm sorry. Not that's terrible. Just oh, Sam." Which somehow stung worse. I could hear her soft exhale on the other end of the line. "He's been slipping," she said, "financially, drinking, everything. He told me he was thinking about moving in with Dylan." I felt the floor tilt under me a little. "He's not my problem anymore," I said. It came out sharper than I meant. "I know," she replied, "but you need to decide if you're closing the door for good." I didn't answer right away. Because here's the truth no one talks about when it comes to estranged parents. They don't die all at once. They disappear on stages. First it's the birthday calls that stop feeling sincere. Then it's the silence after big life events. Then it's pawn shops. Then it's guilt-tripping voicemails. Then it's someone else saying he's not doing so well. And then somehow it's you deciding whether to go to the funeral. A week later I got a letter in the mail. Real letter, blue ink, spiral notebook paper torn at the edge. From him. The handwriting looked shakier than I remembered. The whole page smelled faintly of beer and cold grease, like he'd written it at the VFW bar. It read, "Sam, I know I screwed up. I don't remember every detail, things get hazy sometimes, but I know you're angry, I know I did wrong. It's not just about the comics, I get that. I miss you. I'm not good with words like you, but I wanted to say that I still keep your third grade drawing on my fridge, the one with Batman and the jetpack. If you want to talk, I'm here. I'll understand if you don't. Dad." I read it twice. Then I set it on the kitchen counter and stared at it for 15 minutes. It was more acknowledgement than I'd expected. But not enough. There was no "I'm sorry." No, I shouldn't have done it. No mention of taking my things, lying about it, using my name to pawn them off. Just vagueness. Hazy timelines, vague remorse, nostalgia as currency. I didn't respond. But I didn't throw the letter away either. I just folded it and slid it into the back of my journal. Behind the list. That same weekend, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside, a sealed slabbed comic, CGC graded, my name and signature still visible on the inside board faintly. It was Batman Year 11. One of the ones he'd sold. One of the ones I never thought I'd see again. Taped to the front was a sticky note. "Guy found me on Facebook, said this belonged to you." That was all. I checked the slabbed case. The grading label had a small sticker from a shop in Ohio. I don't know how it found its way back to me. But it did. And that meant something. Not forgiveness. But maybe momentum. That night I finally opened the box I'd kept sealed for years. The one labeled "Sam, do not toss." Inside were sketches I'd made in high school, comic scripts, Ziploc bags with carded action figures I never opened, my first rejection letter from DC Comics when I applied for an internship, a photo of me and Randy at the store's 20-year anniversary party holding up matching X-Men shirts. And at the very bottom, a birthday card. From my dad. From when I was 13. His handwriting was neater then. "I'm proud of you, buddy. Keep dreaming. You've always had your own world. I'm lucky you let me into it. Dad." I set the card next to the letter from last week. And then I sat down with both of them and made peace with the gap between those two men. One was trying. The other didn't know how. Maybe they were the same guy. Maybe not. But either way, I was done letting the damage control the narrative. I didn't call him. But I wrote my own letter. Not to send. Just to say it. "Dad, I loved you long after you stopped showing up. I carried you into every good thing I built, hoping you'd be proud. You didn't have to be perfect, you just had to be honest. I still have the comics, not all of them, but enough. I'm keeping the ones that hurt and the ones that healed. That includes you. Sam. I sealed it. Taped it inside the cover of Flash 241. The same one I'd slipped my original letter into. Because grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just being ready to stop waiting for someone to be what they can't. I didn't go to his birthday. That was new. Even when we were strained, years when we only exchanged cold texts or a gift card left in a gas station envelope, I still showed up. I'd drive the 2 hours, sit in his kitchen while the news played too loud in the background, and pretend we were still father and son in the old way. But this year, I didn't go. He turned 63. Dylan texted me a photo from the VFW, Dad holding a slice of store-bought cake surrounded by guys in camo hats and oil-stained jeans. His smile looked weak, not miserable, just thin, like a rubber band stretched too long. I stared at that photo for a long time. I didn't feel good about skipping. But I didn't feel bad either. I just felt free. Instead of going to his birthday, I drove to Randy's Collectibles. I had a plan. Over the past few months, I'd been collecting again, not to replace every lost issue. Some were long gone, swallowed up in pawn shop back rooms or resold through online marketplaces, but I'd rebuilt enough to fill 2 new short boxes plus some framed singles on my wall. I carried a backpack into the shop and asked Randy if he had time. "Always for you, Sam," he said, pushing a stack of inventory sheets aside. I pulled out my new finds, Saga 4 finally back in my hands. Black Hole 1, not my original, but the same edition, and this one still smelled like paper pulp and printer ink. I even found a beat-up X-Men 129 that reminded me of a summer I spent trading chores for store credit. Randy looked over each one like they were artifacts. "Not bad," he said. "You're missing a few essentials, though." "Yeah," I replied, "but that's kind of the point now." He raised a brow. "I used to collect to feel complete," I told him. "Now I collect to remember who I was, not to fix it, just to witness it." Randy gave me that warm grin he always did when I said something more grown-up than he expected. "You always had a way of seeing things sideways," he said. Before I left, he handed me something I hadn't asked for. A blank sketch variant of Detective Comics, nothing printed on the cover but a white background and the logo. "Make it yours," he said. "Draw something, write something, doesn't matter, just claim it." I took it home and thought about what to draw. That night I found myself sketching the garage. Not the comics, not my dad. Just the garage door slightly ajar, sunlight cutting across the floor in a slanted stripe, a shadow hunched in the corner facing away. And next to it, a kid on the threshold. Not stepping in. Not running out. Just watching. Waiting. Weeks passed, I didn't hear from Dad. Not a text, not a call, not even one of those "I found your old stuff again" excuses. I'd like to say I didn't think about him, but I did. Every time I picked up a comic, I wondered what he'd say if he saw it. Would he remember buying it for me? Would he even know what he sold? Would he care? But I never reached out. I'd done that for 30 years, always being the one to close the gap, always dragging the conversation back to neutral just to avoid the silence. This time, the silence was his to break. He never did. The letter came on a Monday. Not from him. From a law office. Thin white envelope, plain typeface, no stamp, just the office's name printed in the top left corner and my address typed out like they'd used an ancient computer. I stared at it a long time before opening it. Inside, a single-page notice. No emotion, just legal language. "We regret to inform you that your father, Daniel W. Prescott, passed away last week. As his next of kin, you are named as the executor of his estate. Enclosed are the initial instructions for inventory and settlement." I read it twice. Then I folded the letter and set it on the table. I didn't cry. Didn't curse. Didn't feel much at all. Just a dull ache behind the eyes, like a storm that had already passed but left everything damp and quiet. He was gone, and so was any chance of finally hearing "I'm sorry." I went back to the house 3 days later. Not because I wanted to. Because someone had to. It was smaller than I remembered, shabbier, paint peeling on the porch, weeds climbing through cracks in the driveway. Inside, the air smelled like old coffee, dust, and something bitter I couldn't quite place. I walked room by room, cataloging his life. Half-finished puzzles on the table, beer cans in a stack by the recliner, his phone dead, plugged into the wall like it had been charging for weeks but never turned on. In the back room, I found a plastic bin marked TOOLS. Inside, a mess of sockets, wrenches, a flashlight without batteries. And at the very bottom, in a faded manila folder, was something I hadn't expected. A photo. Me, age 11, holding up Flash 241, grinning ear to ear, my dad standing behind me with both hands on my shoulders. On the back, in his handwriting, "He saved up all summer for this, proud of you, buddy." I sat on the edge of the bed and just breathed. I don't know how long I was there. There wasn't much to inherit. No will, no savings, just the house, some junk, and a garage full of tools and beer-stained memories. I cleared it all out over the next week. Rented a dumpster for most of it. Kept only 3 things. The photo. The manila folder with my childhood sketches. A ratty composition notebook labeled "Rough Days, Do Not Read." I read it anyway. Inside were scattered notes, half-sentences, thoughts. He's better than me. Don't know how to say I'm sorry. Every time I try, I just make it worse. Sold the comics, knew it was wrong, didn't stop. I hope he forgives me. I hope I didn't ruin it for good. I closed the notebook and held it to my chest. And that's when I cried. Not for what he did, but for what he couldn't do. At the funeral, I gave the eulogy. There weren't many people there, just a few cousins, some guys from the VFW, the clerk from the gas station he always talked to. I kept it simple. I didn't rewrite history. I didn't lie. I just said, my dad was a complicated man. He wasn't always fair. He wasn't always kind. But he showed up in the ways he knew how, until he didn't. And the truth is, the last thing he gave me was silence. But before that, he gave me stories. And that counts for something. No one clapped. But no one looked away either. When I got home, I opened Flash 241 again. Inside was the letter I wrote him. Next to it, I slipped the funeral program. And then I wrote one more line at the bottom of the page. This time, I'm the one who closes the book. I still collect. Not obsessively. Not to fill a void. Just to remember. When I teach my students about storytelling, I talk about arcs, beginnings, middles, ends. I tell them not every character gets resolution, not every villain gets defeated, not every father gets redeemed. But every story teaches you something. Even the unfinished ones. Especially those. So yeah, my dad sold my childhood comics for beer money behind my back. And I'll never get them all back. But I know who I am now. And I know what I'm worth. That matters more than a long box of glossy paper ever could. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life confessions and emotional journeys like this one.